afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. One of the most important things you can do to add value to your home or property is to plant a tree. Trees are long-term investments and so you want them to last. But there are a number of factors to consider. Selecting the right tree, finding the right spot, and the aftercare that's necessary once the tree is in the ground. Today we're going to get some tips on all of these tree-related issues. Joining me is our expert horticulturalist from the University of Vermont, Leonard Perry. Welcome, and you've brought a friend.
I have. It's great to be back, Judy. And with me and us is Vijay Komai, I've known for some years. First as a nursery professional and grower in Charlotte for some years, but now as a consultant with the Bartlett Tree Experts Company, national firm, where every day he consults with not only home gardeners and home landscapers, but professionals as well on all the tree issues, from planting to care, as you mentioned, and what few steps we can do to avoid having problems down the road.
Well, welcome. What are some of the topics that you want to discuss today?
Well, I think choosing the right tree for the right place is very important, and also proper planting. Chronic mistakes are made out there in the landscape, and we see declining or failing trees everywhere because they simply weren't planted properly.
Now, you brought some pictures to really help illustrate the key points and that you want property owners to know. Where do you want to start?
I think we have to start by talking about where trees want to grow. So our first photo is a photo of a native landscape. I mean, trees growing in their natural environment. We have this constant cycling of nutrients, leaves and debris falling, rotting, very cool soil temperatures, a lot of organic matter, and a wonderful atmosphere for beneficial microorganisms, beneficial fungi that all relate back to ongoing tree health.
A couple things just to point out too. Notice the base of the trunks we'll be talking about, and no bark mulch. So.
No bark. I like that. Very good.
The trees in our urban landscape, it's a far cry from where the trees want to be in their natural environment. In extreme cases like this, trees are planted in with very limited soil volume, if it's soil at all. Very high heat environment. We've got influx of road salt, pollutants, very, very tough environment for trees to survive. So it's all about the right tree in the right place. And this is a great photo where somebody didn't take into consideration the ultimate size of the tree.
Wow.
But it's not only the ultimate size of the tree, we also have to take considerations of the soil type, the drainage, is it well drained, is it a moist soil? And how large the tree is ultimately going to get, its requirements for sunlight, its hardiness, and how it's going to interact with the other trees in the landscape over time as well.
I brought a photo just from my own home. This is not us, the previous homeowners, obviously. On the left, planted spruce trees too close to the power wires, and that's how they've been trimmed up by the power company now. And on the right, actually, we talked to this person this last year, and they said, yeah, they admitted they put those cute little cedars in too close to the house, and now we have to, every few years, come in and prune them back away from there. But we leave them because they provide good bird habitat, and one of the functions of evergreens, screening from the summer sun and the winter winds.
Right.
And here's a good example of thinking more long-term. There's simply not space for all of these trees. The tree in the foreground off the corner of the building on the right-hand side of the screen is a bur oak, which wants to be 60 feet wide at maturity and 60 to 70 feet tall. And behind it we have a blue spruce about 20 feet away, and behind that a maple. So, thinking more long-term, 15, 20, 30, 50 years down the road, there's simply not room. And so some choices are going to have to be made here, and the trees are going to be fighting each other.
Which I think, it's sad because people want that short-term fix and just don't realize 20 years down the road, the next homeowner, like us, we're going to have to make some choices on that.
Right.
I'm not even sure what to say about this.
Was it pruned that way?
It was pruned that way. Maintaining trees for the long term, when we're pruning them, we're pruning to enhance and promote their natural shape and form. And that was not done here.
This person didn't get the memo.
They didn't get the memo. This crabapple has been hedged over time. And now it's a maintenance nightmare. This has to be done every year. I'm not particularly fond of the look of it, and it also can create a lot of disease problems because we have a very dense foliage, very dense canopy that doesn't dry out.
So the right tree needs the right place. Now, assuming we've made the right choices, what about how we plant the trees? Because that can be a whole nother waste of money too.
Yeah. Planting is critical. There's some very simple steps in planting a tree, and the most important thing is proper planting depth. Once you've selected the right tree for the right place, planting it at the proper depth is critical. And it's an epidemic in our urban and community landscapes where trees are planted too deep, and we have problems down the road because of that. And we have some photos to show that as well.
Show some photos, and I think the first starting with is the choice people have to make when they're finding the trees. There's a container versus balled and burlap, which is one of the choices people have to make.
So you can see in this photo a tree in its native environment. We have a very pronounced root flare at the base of the tree. It's natural root flare, and trees are often coming from nurseries, whether in a container or balled and burlap, with that root flare already buried. On the right, you can see the soil line, and that was soil that was removed from the top of the root ball. And at the right-hand side of that, at the base, you can just start to see the natural root flare of that tree. And that is the depth that it needs to be planted at.
So people are planting trees way too deep.
Way too deep.
So often the recommendation is the same level it's growing in the pot or nursery. Well, that's not necessarily the case. If it's too deep in the pot, then you need to, that root flare is the real key, I think.
Absolutely.
So then the next thing that you can look for in these containers is?
Trees in containers, great way for homeowners to buy a tree, lighter weight, easily transportable, easy for them to handle and plant. But we see trees planted in containers too deep, and we also see them left in containers too long. And so they have a root system that's all bound up in there with woody roots, and here we can clearly see a girdling root around the base of this tree.
Basically, when you have a pot like that and the roots can't go anywhere, they start going in circles and they get bigger and basically strangles the tree. I think we got a good example here you brought, VJ.
Yeah, sometimes the effects of planting too deep are immediate, but oftentimes we don't see the problems till far down the road. This is a sugar maple on the left that you can see the crown is clearly thinning. It's off color. The leaves are of smaller than normal size. There's a little bit of tip dye back there. The crown is declining. I went in and excavated around the base of this tree, and you can see the picture on the right. There's clearly no visible root flare. And what happened was, over time, tree roots grew upward. They need oxygen, and they started encircling the base of the tree. As they grew in diameter and the tree grew in diameter, they actually compressed the vascular tissue of the tree and starved the root system of the tree. By the time we see the crown declining, it's too late.
And so you can't do anything about that? That tree is going to die?
For this tree, it's too late. If we recognize trees in the landscape where we don't see that natural root flare, they look like a pole going in the ground, but we're not yet seeing any signs of decline in the crown, we can excavate that soil and mitigate any root problems. This is a great example. I love this photograph. I feel bad for the trees in it, but you can see the tree on the right in the foreground. It has a nice full crown, great color, and if you look very closely at the base of the tree, you can actually see the first true roots and that root flare exposed. That tree was planted at the proper depth. The trees to the left of it, continuing down the row, and there was about another 7 of them, were all planted too deep. These trees were planted at the same size, same time, same soil conditions.
Really?
And that's a dramatic difference. You can see the photo on the left shows what the rest of the trees look like. No visible root flare, looks like a pole going in the ground.
Yeah.
And as a result, the trees have suffered.
I think that's a good, I like that analogy. If it looks like a pole going on the ground, look at the base, pull away some dirt, pull away some mulch.
There'd still be time for these trees if you were to clear away?
That was a tough call on those.
Yeah.
And besides that, they were elms, which are prone to Dutch elm disease.
Right.
So to put a lot of money into them and then have Dutch elm disease come in and take them out.
Interesting, yeah. What are we seeing here? This is the correct way to do it?
Determining your proper planting depth. When we plant a tree, we want to dig a hole approximately 3 times the size of the root ball, but we don't want to dig it any deeper than the depth of the root ball, but more importantly, the depth of where that root flare is. So first you have to take your tree, determine if it was planted too deep in the nursery or in the container, in the root ball. So you open it up the top, dig down, find that root flare, and then measure from that point to the bottom of your container or your root ball, and that is your planting depth.
Gotcha.
Removing wire baskets is another chronic problem. Baskets, balled and burlap trees that come from a nursery are in a wire basket. It's galvanized steel. It lasts for many, many years. Tree roots will grow through those openings and over time be girdled. The photo down in the right-hand corner shows a tree that we excavated with the use of an air spade, compressed air, and you can clearly see the roots growing through those openings in the basket. As the roots grow in diameter, they will be squeezed off and girdled. And when we backfill trees, people often ask, should you amend the soil?
Right, add fertilizer.
I usually say no unless what you're dealing with is compacted fill. If you're in a reasonably good soil, we don't want to make for a big transition zone between the root ball and the soil that it'll be growing into. So in a case where you have compacted soil or poor fill or poor soils, adding some well-composted organic matter up to 20% that's thoroughly mixed with the backfill is very beneficial.
I would say maybe make the hole even a little bit wider if it's that bad.
Absolutely.
And I like the idea you use the tarp. That's what I do when planting anything. That way it keeps the soil off the grass and it's easy to just dump it back in the hole. I think that's a nice little trick there.
And then aftercare is absolutely critical in the establishment of trees and their long-term vigor. And you know, people plant a tree and they water it initially and then they kind of forget about it. And you know, you need to keep the tree well watered through the establishment period, which can be a couple of years for a larger tree.
And I think well watering too is just soak it good, but not just sprinkle it every day.
Right. Less frequent, more deep soakings are better. And keep in mind that until that tree roots out into the surrounding soil, it's only getting its moisture from the root ball. And a proper layer of mulch, 2 to 3 inches, never piled against the trunk of the tree.
Right, we see this all the time.
Yeah, we call this volcano mulching. This is an epidemic, and riding around at this time of year, you know, there's landscape maintenance companies out there, and they're just piling on the mulch. 2 to 3 inches of mulch total around your trees and your landscape plants. That doesn't mean adding 2 to 3 inches a year. So you get a buildup of mulch when it's against the trunk of the tree, creates a very moist environment. You can get rotting of that bark. Has the same effect also of suffocating the roots, just as planting too deep would.
Now we've got a couple of minutes left. Now that we need to keep the tree healthy, what are some areas or things that can go wrong once we've got the tree in the ground?
Well, people do not water it well.
Yep.
And then thinking down the road, you know, once a tree is well established, sometimes people will change their landscape, build a patio, you know, do some excavation work and damage or change the situation for the tree, which can send it into decline. When we plant trees, people often ask, should you stake a tree? My answer is only if you need to. Staking of trees, if done properly, like a 12-gauge wire connected to stake posts. You see the photo on the right, there should be some protection around the trunk of that tree, so as it grows in diameter, you're not girdling it.
And there's some there, but not enough. You can see that wire just eating right into that bark there.
Yeah, so you want to remove that once the tree is fully rooted, probably after a growing season, get the wire off.
Okay, what are we seeing here now?
Okay, this is a great example where a disturbance took place here. On this property, there were 3 beautiful sugar maples. You can see there's only 2 now. The third one died. They raised the grade over the root systems of these trees, trying to regrade their lawn. It killed the first maple, and the others are in decline.
So if people have questions about trees, planting, and so forth, what should they do?
Well, I've got a lot on my website, some articles, in fact, one just on this very topic. So you can go to my perrysperennials.info, the Perry's Perennials pages, and check out the articles there.
But it's better to ask questions before you get the trees in the ground.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Ask the professionals.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. I'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.